Salute me, that's an order. That's what Senator JD Vance demanded, right in the middle of Buckingham Palace courtyard. But the royal guard's response? He didn't raise a hand. He didn't even blink. And what happened next left the entire palace dead silent and reminded the senator, in no uncertain terms, this isn't America. Want to know exactly how it unfolded? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The black motorcade swept through those massive wrought iron gates of Buckingham Palace, with the kind of precision you'd expect from a diplomatic convoy. The car's glossy surfaces caught every drop of that classic London drizzle. You know, that rain that's barely there, but somehow manages to get into everything, blurring the edges of the palace like some Instagram filter. All along the barriers, tourists were lifting their phones, desperate to catch a glimpse of whoever was important enough to roll up to the palace like this. Then out steps Senator JD Vance. And get this, he doesn't even bother waiting for the umbrella. One hand's adjusting his navy overcoat, the other's straightening that little American flag pin on his lapel, and he's scanning the courtyard with this expression that's, well, let's just say he looked about as impressed as someone watching a high school production of Hamlet. Remind me again why we're treating this like some kind of medieval LARP session, he mutters to his aide, this young staffer who's perfected that nervous smile people wear when their boss is being difficult in public. See, they were here as part of this bipartisan delegation, meeting senior British officials to talk defence cooperation, shared global interests, all that diplomatic stuff. But to Vance, all this ceremony and the uniforms, the music, the choreographed movements felt more like some overblown theatrical production than actual statecraft. A few paces behind him, another aide's whispering to a colleague, "Hey, careful. Remember what happened last time he went off about royal protocol in that interview?" As the group starts moving toward the west courtyard for their formal walkthrough, Vance picks up the pace, his boots crunching against the gravel with what feels like deliberate defiance. This palace official starts rattling off historical facts about the changing of the guard, but you can tell Vance is only half listening at best. "You know what doesn't make a military stronger?" he says under his breath, just loud enough for the aide at his shoulder to hear. "Spectacle. We've got actual war fighters. They've got, what, a parade team in fancy costumes?" The aide wisely says absolutely nothing. Just ahead, two British officers in full ceremonial dress are standing there, waiting to receive the Americans. Vance gives them this quick, almost dismissive nod, but his eyes are already drifting toward those distant figures of the royal guards stationed across the courtyard. Their uniforms are practically glowing against the grey morning, those iconic scarlet coats, the massive bearskin hats, rifles cradled with that perfect, almost robotic symmetry. It's like history just decided to freeze itself in place. To most people, it's this incredible display of discipline and tradition. To Vance, it looks like a museum exhibit that somehow ended up with a salary and benefits. He lets out this soft exhale, watching his breath turn to mist in the damp air. Let's just get through this dog and pony show. The thing is, he had absolutely no idea that the moment that would define his entire visit was literally just a few steps away. Over at the western edge of the courtyard, Lance Corporal Edward Statham stood rooted to the ground like he'd grown there, like some statue carved straight out of British military history. He's wearing that unmistakable uniform of the Queen's Guard. Scarlet tunic, pressed to absolute perfection, with creases sharp enough to cut glass, that towering bearskin hat sitting on his head like it weighs nothing, and white-gloved hands resting on his polished SA-80 rifle. The guy hasn't moved in over an hour. Not a twitch, not a blink, nothing. His gaze is locked forward through the palace grounds, completely unreadable, totally unbreakable. Even with that soft London drizzle beading up on his shoulders, he might as well be made of stone. To any random tourist walking by, he probably looks like a really expensive prop. But to anyone who knows what they're looking at, this guy is anything but. See, Statham, he's 31, born and raised in Devon. Comes from one of those military families where service goes back generations, all the way to the trenches of World War I. He's done tours in Iraq, served in Estonia during joint NATO exercises. This isn't just some soldier, he's a consummate professional, the kind of guy other soldiers tell stories about. Known for judgment that's sharp as a tack under pressure and discipline that borders on superhuman. His appointment to ceremonial duty, that wasn't some cushy reward for good behaviour, he earned every bit of it. Behind the rope barriers, there's this cluster of British veterans gathering. One of them, this guy in his 60s wearing a dark blazer, absolutely covered in medals, leans over to a younger companion. "See that guard? That's Statham," he says, nodding subtly toward the motionless figure. Held his position during that absolute mess near Fallujah. Didn't even flinch when comms went dead and everything went sideways. Around them, tourists are snapping pictures left and right. A group of school children are watching the guards with that mix of awe and confusion kids get, whispering questions to their teacher. Near the back of the crowd, there's this man standing with an umbrella, something quietly reverent in his posture. The kind of person who recognizes exactly what's unfolding and chooses to observe rather than interfere. Then JD Vance spots him. The American senator had paused halfway through the courtyard, half listening to some staffer's logistical update about their schedule. But something about Statham catches his eye. Not the uniform. He's already mocked that. Not the rifle. It's that absolute unwavering stillness, that total lack of acknowledgement that seems to get right under his skin. "That guy's not even blinking," Vance mutters, tilting his head like he's examining some curiosity at a circus sideshow. His voice isn't particularly loud, but it's just loud enough. A few heads turn. One of the British officers giving the tour makes this subtle shift like he's about to intervene, but then doesn't. Vance slows his pace, veering slightly off the planned path. His eyes stay locked on Statham, like a hunter who's just spotted something interesting to shoot at. Nobody says a word, but the crowd, especially those veterans, they're starting to watch more closely now. Something in the air shifts. You can feel it. Tension. Quiet, but absolutely unmistakable, starting to gather like static electricity before a storm. And Lance Corporal Edward Statham, he remains exactly as he was, completely untouched by the moment, yet somehow right at the centre of it. Vance's stride shifts into this casual, almost arrogant saunter as he closes in on Lance Corporal Statham. His whole entourage is lagging behind, clearly uncertain whether they should follow or pretend they haven't noticed their boss going rogue. The senator's wearing this thin, performative smile, the kind that barely hides the condescension bubbling just beneath the surface. He starts circling Statham, real slow, hands clasped behind his back, like he's some curious visitor at a museum, examining an exhibit. "Well, this is impressive," Vance says, loud enough for the nearby tourists to hear. It's like somebody wound him up and forgot to hit the play button. A few nervous chuckles ripple through the crowd, but you can see several British spectators stiffening up. One woman actually lowers her phone, her expression souring fast. A man in a tweed cap mutters under his breath, "Bloody disgraceful behaviour." But Vance? He's just getting warmed up. "Tell me something," he says to a palace aide who's hovering nearby. "Does he ever actually move?" The poor aide blinks in confusion, mumbling something about ceremonial protocol. Vance cuts him off mid-sentence. "No, seriously, I mean, look at this guy. They tell me he's a combat soldier." He actually chuckles at his own comment. "Looks more like he's auditioning for a spot at Madame Tussauds, if you ask me." Behind him, that retired British colonel in the medal-covered blazer narrows his eyes but keeps quiet, arms folding across his chest. He recognizes exactly what game's being played here. Vance isn't just being disrespectful. He's testing boundaries, poking at symbols he doesn't understand or maybe just doesn't care to respect. Statham remains absolutely still, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Vance takes another step closer, now fully breaking that invisible boundary between visitor and guard, the one every tourist knows not to cross. His voice drops just slightly, pitched just above a whisper, but still sharp enough to cut through the soft drizzle. You ever actually been in a real fight, Corporal? Or are you just here to look pretty for the tourists? Still nothing. Not a twitch. Vance's smile gets wider. That uniform can't be comfortable, especially that hat. What is that thing anyway? Who designed it? Napoleon's tailor? More tourists are turning to watch now. One young American couple exchanges uncomfortable glances, the wife whispering, "Is he even allowed to get that close?" Her boyfriend just shakes his head, looking increasingly uneasy. "Look, I get tradition," Vance continues, raising his voice slightly, making sure he's got an audience. "But this is what happens when symbolism replaces actual combat readiness. You folks dress up discipline in wool and fancy buttons and call it military service." He actually leans in closer now, making a show of inspecting the stitching on Statham's sleeve. "I bet this thing's a fire hazard too." A ripple moves through the watching crowd. Even the school children, sensing something's off, have gone quiet. From a distance, one of the palace guides starts stepping forward, but a senior officer makes this discreet gesture for him to hold back. Vance positions himself directly in Statham's line of sight now, a clear, unmistakable breach of palace visitor etiquette. He's too close, too casual, and way too loud. "You know, in the Marine Corps," Vance announces, addressing no one in particular, but making sure everyone can hear, "we train soldiers to adapt, to respond to threats, not stand around posing for postcards." Still, Statham doesn't move, not an inch. The only sound is that persistent London drizzle, tapping lightly on stone and fabric. "You're really not going to break character, are you?" Vance says, almost sounding impressed. "All that training, all that preparation, just to play statue in the rain." He takes one more half step forward. "Come on, man. Blink, twitch. Hell, give me a salute. Something. Anything." Statham remains perfectly still. And somehow, that stillness is starting to feel like its own kind of authority. A presence that's stronger than any shouting match could ever be. The retired colonel leans toward a nearby tourist, murmuring just loud enough, he's baiting a soldier who's seen more real action than he ever will. But Vance? He can't see it, or won't, but everyone else is starting to. A line has definitely been crossed, and that silence, far from being submission, is becoming the most powerful response of all. Now Vance's whole posture changes. What started as mockery is morphing into something nastier, an assertion of hierarchy, of rank. He squares his shoulders and plants himself directly in front of Lance Corporal Edward Statham, deliberately blocking the guard's forward gaze completely. To anybody who doesn't know better, it might look like curiosity. But to those familiar with palace protocol, this is a clear violation. Guards are never to be approached this closely, never to be obstructed, and absolutely never deliberately. Yet here's JD Vance, standing inches from a motionless soldier, his expression somewhere between challenge and command. "I'm JD Vance," he announces, louder now, clearly addressing the gathering crowd as much as the man in front of him. "United States Senator. I sit on the Armed Services Committee, and I've worn the uniform myself." There's this calculated pause, just long enough for nearby tourists to turn and really pay attention. "I think a little respect is in order, don't you?" Absolute stillness from Statham. Vance reaches up, taps his lapel pin with 2 fingers. That little American flag catching the light. In the military, The real military, we salute rank. That's not just American tradition. That's alliance protocol. He tilts his head slightly, like he's amused by his own audacity. And since we're allies, Corporal, I think it's time you showed some proper military courtesy. He gives this short, sharp nod, then drops the words like he's issuing an order on a battlefield. Salute me. The air practically crystallizes with tension. A few genuine gasps escape the crowd. One woman whispers, "He did not just say that." A father quietly pulls his child back behind the rope line, like they're witnessing something that might explode. Statham doesn't move, not a muscle. Vance doesn't back off. "I'm giving you a direct order, soldier," he continues, actually pointing now, not quite touching, but close enough to make several bystanders visibly flinch. "Salute me. Right now." Complete silence. Not even the tourists are breathing. The guard's 1,000-yard stare remains unbroken. A teenage boy near the back mutters to his friend, "Is this guy actually serious?" Then Vance makes his final, fatal mistake. He steps even closer, so close that his shoulder actually brushes against the edge of Statham's rifle stock. He leans in slightly, chin raised, eyes narrowing to slits. You do understand what chain of command means, don't you? From the sidelines, that retired British colonel exhales through his nose, muttering just loud enough, "Now he's done it. That's a clear violation." Several tourists instinctively reach for their phones, then hesitate. The whole scene has become tense in a way that feels almost sacred, and suddenly nobody wants to break it by filming. Vance's voice drops low, the words meant to intimidate. "Where I come from, disobeying a superior officer gets you a reprimand, or worse." Statham's response is nothing, but somehow that nothing is carrying more weight than any shouted reply ever could. He hasn't saluted. He hasn't flinched. And yet, in his own way, he's answered, just not in any language Vance knows how to understand. The American delegation has stopped farther down the walkway, now watching this spectacle with tight jaws and carefully blank expressions. Even Vance's own aides are looking distinctly uncomfortable. The moment has stretched to its absolute breaking point, and all eyes are locked on the man who hasn't moved an inch. The shift is subtle, so subtle that if you blinked, you might have missed it. But to everyone watching, it lands like thunder. Lance Corporal Edward Statham moves. Not a twitch, not a flinch. This is deliberate, measured, precise action. His white-gloved left hand rises, calm, controlled, methodical, and with one fluid motion, he removes JD Vance's arm from where it's hovering way too close to his rifle. The movement isn't aggressive, it isn't angry, it's just definitive. The crowd inhales as one. You can actually hear it. Then comes the voice, firm, low, polished, like ceremonial steel. "Sir," Statham says, eyes still locked forward in that perfect ceremonial gaze, "you are in direct violation of Standing Palace Protocol 2 Bravo regarding interference with ceremonial personnel." He hasn't shouted. He hasn't even raised his tone, but those words ring out over the courtyard like a drill sergeant's command. Vance actually blinks, momentarily knocked off balance, not just by the response itself, but by its absolute clarity. He'd been expecting silence or maybe deference, not this. Physical encroachment upon an armed ceremonial guard, Statham continues, each word precise as a surgeon's cut, constitutes a security infraction. I must respectfully instruct you to return to the designated visitor's path. The words are clearly memorized, pulled straight from military protocol, but there's nothing robotic about how he delivers them. This is composed, unshakable, human. The veterans in the crowd straighten instinctively, spines going rigid like they're responding to an old command. Vance tries to regain control, squaring his shoulders. So now British guards are lecturing senators. Statham's tone doesn't shift even a fraction. "No, sir, I do not lecture. I execute my duty. To the Crown." Gasps ripple through the crowd again. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person starts clapping. Then another. The applause is hesitant at first, like people aren't sure if it's appropriate. One elderly man just nods silently, his eyes getting that glassy look of pride mixed with old memories. Vance opens his mouth to respond, then seems to think better of it. Instead, he takes a step back, just one pace. It's not an apology, but it's definitely a retreat. His face is still hard, still defiant, but something in his posture has shifted. This encounter hasn't gone according to his script. Somewhere, an American tourist whispers to her companion, "Wait, I thought they weren't allowed to talk." "They're not," replies a British local speaking softly, "unless someone crosses the line." Vance's aides are now cautiously moving toward their boss. One touches his elbow gently, murmuring, "Sir, we should probably rejoin the group." But Vance doesn't move immediately. His eyes stay locked, not on Statham's eyes, which remain dutifully focused ahead, but on the man himself. Like he's trying to figure out what just happened, trying to reclaim a moment that's already slipped away. Then comes the final line. Statham, already resuming his perfect guard posture, adds with surgical precision, "This isn't America, Senator." The words are quiet, almost gentle, but everyone hears them. A few people actually break into open applause now. One British teenager whispers to his mate, "That was absolutely ice cold." Even the children seem to sense that something important just happened, something that won't show up in any tourist guidebook or be explained on any palace tour. The silence returns. But this time, it belongs entirely to Statham. Vance steps back fully now, his jaw set in a hard line, lips pressed together. For all his rank, all his bluster, all his presence, he suddenly looks very, very small. And Edward Statham? He's already back at perfect attention, as if the entire confrontation had been nothing more than a passing breeze, as if silence once again is the most devastating response of all. Just as the tension hits its absolute peak, a new figure emerges from the palace side entrance, moving with that particular kind of calm, deliberate purpose that immediately commands attention. Captain Eliza Montgomery, Palace Protocol Officer, decorated logistics commander and former attaché to NATO's Joint Command, cuts an impressive silhouette as she crosses the wet courtyard. She's tall, sharp-featured, her uniform so crisp it looks like it could stand up on its own. Everything about her radiates that distinctly British authority, quiet, efficient, and absolutely immovable. "Senator Vance," she says evenly, not even breaking stride as she approaches, "if I may have a word." Vance turns, probably expecting defensiveness, maybe even an apology. What he gets instead is something far more disarming. Perfect civility, with steel running right through its core. "I understand there may have been some confusion regarding ceremonial protocol," she continues, making this gentle, sweeping gesture with an open palm that guides him a few paces away from the crowd. It's not an order, but it's also very clearly not optional. Vance follows, trying hard to project calm, though his aides are shadowing him like nervous puppies. Montgomery doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't grandstand. Instead, she speaks with that clipped precision of someone who's de-escalated far worse situations behind closed NATO doors. "Palace guards are sworn to the Crown," she explains, her tone conversational but firm. "Their authority, while on post, supersedes that of all visiting personnel, including elected officials from allied nations." She pauses just long enough to let that sink in, then adds, with perfect timing, "including senators." You can actually see Vance's eyebrows twitch. "Lance Corporal Statham," she continues, nodding back toward the still motionless guard, "is not merely a ceremonial fixture. He's a combat-decorated infantryman. His last deployment was in Mali under Operation New Barricade. Before that, joint operations with US Marines in Anbar Province. Bronze Service Star, mentioned in dispatches twice. Several of your American commanders have described him as unshakable under fire. She lets those words land before delivering the final point. He's not ignoring you, Senator. He's protecting you by maintaining the discipline of his post. Vance's jaw works silently, processing this new information. A second figure approaches. Brigadier Alan Bexley, commander of the Household Division. His uniform carries fewer ribbons than Vance's, but there's something in his eyes. That quiet weight of decades of actual service that commands immediate respect. Senator, Bexley says with formal courtesy, these guards aren't actors in costume. They're combat soldiers, trained to transition seamlessly between battlefield conditions and ceremonial duty without breaking stride. That kind of duality demands more than mere physical endurance. It requires principle. Vance's voice, when it finally comes, is noticeably lower. In the US, soldiers salute elected leadership, its basic chain of command. Montgomery nods, acknowledging the point. And in the UK, soldiers on ceremonial duty do not break formation for any reason short of an immediate threat or direct protocol breach. Saluting an interfering civilian, even one of high office, would itself be a breach of protocol. Brigadier Bexley adds, his tone measured, what might appear to be stubborn silence is actually one of the highest forms of professional discipline we ask of our service members. He remained calm, measured, and respectful, even under deliberate provocation. Behind them, the crowd is beginning to disperse slowly, the incident already transforming into whispered conversations and shared glances. A few people linger, still watching Statham, whose perfect stillness has returned as if nothing had ever disturbed it. Montgomery softens her tone just slightly. These moments are easily misunderstood, Senator. Many visitors make similar assumptions, but there's a reason these men are trusted to represent the Crown in front of millions. Vance exhales slowly. He doesn't apologize. His pride won't let him, but he doesn't push further either. Something has shifted. Whether it's understanding, embarrassment, or simple political calculation isn't entirely clear. But he nods, just once. Then turns and begins walking back toward his delegation, falling a few deliberate paces behind his aides. And behind him, the British officers remain still, watching, steady and silent as the scarlet-coated sentinel in the courtyard. The rain has softened into an almost imperceptible mist now, the kind that clings to overcoats and makes everything look slightly soft around the edges. The American delegation has regrouped near the palace gates, their diplomatic vehicles idling discreetly behind the manicured hedgerow. JD Vance stands slightly apart from the others, saying little, his jaw still set in that defensive angle of someone who knows they've miscalculated. He glances back over his shoulder, just once. Across the courtyard, Lance Corporal Edward Statham remains exactly where he's been all along. Unmoved, unshaken, that scarlet silhouette standing against the grey stone like something carved from British military tradition itself. His rifle rests at precisely the same angle, his gaze fixed at that eternal 45 degrees, not looking at anyone specific, and yet somehow taking in everything. Vance hesitates. Something about that unwavering stillness makes him look again. Near the rope barrier, a small cluster of British veterans has remained behind. One of them, a distinguished-looking gentleman in a navy blazer, his chest decorated with campaign ribbons that speak of long service, steps forward without any fanfare. He approaches Statham's position respectfully, stopping just beyond the barrier, maintaining that careful distance that shows he understands the protocols. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raises his weathered hand and delivers a crisp, textbook-perfect salute. Statham doesn't respond. He doesn't move, but the gesture doesn't require acknowledgement. It's not about getting something back. Another figure follows. A younger man, possibly retired military himself, offering the same silent tribute. Then, in what might be the most surprising moment of all, one of the American security detail, an older Marine by the cut of his bearing, exchanges a knowing look with a colleague, steps forward, and adds his own salute to the quiet ceremony. One by one, others join in, not in protest, not in defiance, just in recognition of something that transcends national boundaries, a soldier's respect for another soldier's discipline. Vance watches all of this unfold. He doesn't speak. For once, he seems to understand this isn't his moment to fill with words. His aides shift uncomfortably, but nobody rushes him. This isn't the kind of scene you interrupt. Statham maintains his post, unchanging. There are no speeches, no formal apologies, no social media moments, just silence. And somehow, in that silence, more gets said than in all the words that came before it. Finally, Vance turns away, moving toward the waiting vehicle. He pulls open the door himself, not waiting for anyone to do it for him, and slides inside. The door closes with that expensive, muffled thud of diplomatic transport. The motorcade begins to pull away, its tail lights reflecting briefly in the palace windows like fading embers. And still, there on the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace's courtyard stands a single guard in red. Unmoved by ceremony, unshaken by ego, his silence making a statement louder than any salute ever could. Do you think JD Vance deserved a salute, or did he get exactly what he deserved? And here's the bigger question. How should international guests behave when visiting traditions that aren't their own? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We genuinely read every single one. If this story hit home for you, if it made you think differently about respect and tradition, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tap that notification bell so you never miss tomorrow's upload. Know someone who needs to see this? Someone who could use a reminder about respect. Share it with them. And hey, if you're hungry for more powerful moments just like this one, check out these other videos popping up on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another story that proves one simple truth. Respect isn't about rank, it's about knowing when to stay silent.